do that, I want to introduce a couple of members of the Daily Logo, as staff members, if they could stand up. These are the people you want to be getting to know. Staff members, they are. If they could stand up. If you're interested in working at the logo, meet these people. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Liz Cleary. I'm the editor-in-chief. I'm Alex Lambert. I'm the managing editor.
I'm Antonio Sanchez. I'm the assistant culture editor.
John Tagaski, the news editor.
My name is Arnie Napolitano. I'm the assistant news editor.
My name is J.R. Oppenheim. I'm the assistant sports editor and beat writer for men's basketball.
Great, thanks guys. So I'm here to introduce the introducer. Our moderator today is Peter Rice. Peter and I were reporters together at the Albuquerque Tribune many moons ago, actually 5 years ago. This month is when it closed. And Peter's going to be introducing all the panelists.
Thanks, Kate. I actually wanted to start off by talking not about breaking news, but about improv comedy. Have you all seen an improv show? I trust. Yes, good. You like it? It's good. Now, they are allegedly making all of this up as they go along. But in reality, they're not. They practice improv, which seems like kind of an oxymoron, but it's true. They practice putting themselves in situations where they don't know what's going to happen next. And what does this have to do with us? We're journalists. Because breaking news can be anything and anywhere. And on one hand, you can't prepare for that, right? It's anything, anywhere. But actually, with practice and with forethought, you can, I promise, and these guys promise, that you can hone your instincts to some extent. You can hone them to get some ideas of where to start out. And perhaps most importantly, you can train yourself not to freak out under the pressure. So here to help us expect the unexpected, we have an excellent panel. Russell Contreras is a law enforcement and immigration reporter for the Associated Press. Henry Lopez here on the end. He runs a company called Lopez WebWorks, which trains publishers in how to adapt to the digital world. And in the middle here is Sean Griswold, a writer and producer with KOB-TV. So gentlemen, if I could have you start out by telling us a little war story of the craziest breaking news adventure you've ever had in the business.
I'm interested in hearing Russell's.
Yeah, Russell, what do you got?
Well, I was starting off as a reporter at a small newspaper in Conroe, Texas, called the Conroe Courier. And I get a call from we used to get crazy calls all the time. I get a call from an old guy saying, you need to come out to my home out in Cut and Shoot, Texas, 3 words, because there's an elephant running around. So I get on the phone, I'm like working on some United Way feature. I didn't want to be bothered. So I said, well, what color is it? Is it pink? And he starts yelling at me and cussing, and he's like, it's a really elephant. You need to get out of here. I said, oh, thank you, sir, I'll check it out. He then calls my editor. My editor comes out and says, there's a guy claiming it's an elephant. I said, yeah, I asked if it had wings. He says, get your ass out there and check it. So I go out there, and sure enough, there's an elephant walking around. Not only is there one, there's 5. And apparently there was a guy next door who ran a business called Trunks and Humps, and he had 5 Sahara endangered species elephants, and one had escaped. And was this old guy had just had a heart attack, and he recovers, wakes up, and he sees an elephant making kissy faces on his window. And so it became this story. But so I went around and checked, and not only did the guy have elephants, but he also had llamas and some camels. And the camel, apparently, as the guy was talking, spits, and when they spit, they can really hurt you. And it hit the guy where he had his heart attack. He was on the floor. So it became this guy got attacked by all these circus animals. So it became this story. Right, and it was a breaking news story that there's these elephants, and of course they escaped and they went into the major highway at the time. So you're in this country rural area north of Houston in Texas, East Texas. Some of it's an area that is still run by the Klan, and all of a sudden you have these elephants running around from Africa. So it became this story, and it got national attention. What are these elephants or these animals doing out here in Texas? Because they were stopping traffic in this rural area and endangering folks. And after this, there was another guy who had some tigers, and the tigers escaped. And these rednecks, it was a CNN with guys with the overalls and no shirt underneath, one undone, was going, and they found one tiger and they shot it and skinned it and drove it around town. So in this area that was known for its racial violence is becoming a circus. So the story evolved, and of course it started with this breaking news, and of course you do follow-ups on this. And so what else could you think of as a follow-up is, okay, well, these elephants have to use the bathroom. So where does it go? So in city council, people were talking about it ain't fun living near elephants when you got 5 tons of dung next to you. So it became the story that evolved, and so I became the elephant rider. So I got picked up by the AP, and then people called me for jobs. Like, hey man, if you could do this in Conroe, you could do anything. So that was my first breaking news experience.
So your future moderators of the world, I should have learned this last year. Russell always goes last when asked questions like this. It's hard to top him. We've got another great story about the clan that you talked about last year, actually. But any of you want to?
Oh, I'm next in line. Okay, so my role with KOB TV, I'm the my main role is the assignments editor. So whenever you hear someone on air say this just into our newsroom, I'm the person that the news came to. I'm the one who relays that information to our reporters, producers, anchors. So I'm constantly looking for news. Where I sit at my desk, I have 7 police scanners all talking to me from across the state. I even dream in police code sometimes. So I follow and track a lot of crime. I've been part of coverage on wildfires across the state, breaking weather news, traffic updates, Johnny Tapia's death, whatever daily crime that happens in Albuquerque, we're almost always on top of it before everything else. Most recently, we covered the Griego homicides, where the 15-year-old was charged with killing 5 of his family members. From our newsroom, I was the first person to get that information and then, of course, pass it on. So that was interesting. But my first breaking news story actually came my first week at the Daily Lobo. I had just been hired as a cops reporter, $5 a day. My editor, Pat Lohman, was like, "It's going to be great. It's going to be a new position. You're going to just go to the UNMPD every day, check their arrest list, check their police reports, and then write about anything crazy." And so the first day, he actually takes me to go meet the police, and me being a paranoid college student, I'm like, "Oh my God, they're going to have me arrested here. Like, who's this big cop? What are all these assault rifles doing?" And so the day after that, Pat gives me a call around 2 o'clock. I just woke up. And he's like, "Hey, get over here right now. We just heard a professor was killed." So I'm like, all right. So I'm walking over there to the Lobo thinking like, wow, is this going to be covering crime? And this is crazy thinking about this. So we get to the Lobo, and all we know at that time is that police are investigating a homicide at a house near campus. And so we go to the scene, and if you ever cover a breaking news scene, you're going to be blocked by a lot of cops who don't know anything. And if they do know something, good luck getting them to tell you anything. So, go to the cops, ask them, "Hey, what's going on?" He basically gives me the same thing that we already knew. Homicide at a house. He points about a block and a half away. We can't see the house. My photographer's complaining to me. She's like, "I can't get a good shot." I'm getting frustrated because I don't like not knowing things. That's part of why I feel like I'm good at this job, is because I'm so nosy and I want to know more. So I'm getting frustrated. I knew the neighborhood a little bit. I know that there's an alleyway that goes behind the houses. So I pull the photographer aside, and I'm like, "Hey, let's go this way." So we're walking down the alleyway, and as we're walking, in my head, I'm counting the house addresses. I'm like, all right, 1800, 1802, 1804, every backyard we pass. We finally get to the backyard where police are investigating the murder scene, and now we have the address. So now we have another element to the story. We go back to the command post where the TV stations and the journal reporters were sitting there. Nothing going on. They're just sitting in their cars, talking shit. And me not understanding that this is a waiting game, that breaking news, you're waiting for information. You're basically just waiting there. We leave. We go back to the Lobo. We plug in the address that we got into the white pages, and Hector Torres comes up, the name of a professor. We take that name, we plug it into UNM's directory, and then that matches to a Chicano studies professor. So now we have a story. Now we know who died. Now we know the involvement. So then we call police and ask them directly, "Hey, can you confirm that Hector Torres was murdered today?" And the officer basically gave us the rundown and said, "Yes, Hector Torres and his girlfriend Stefania Gray were murdered by her ex-boyfriend. But please don't release their information, their names, until we notify next of kin." So all right, now we can't ID the people, but how are we gonna? But we know more to the story. So how can we report it without identifying the victims? So we reach out to people who were in Professor Torres' class. We talked to a couple students who said, yeah, he'd been talking about issues with his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. They had to file a restraining order against him recently. He missed class this morning. Very unexpectedly, his mood and behavior was just changing. So that sort of ties into a deeper problem. And in our follow-up stories on this case, we come to learn that Ralph Montoya, who was the suspect who killed and eventually is serving 25 years in prison for their deaths, was a mean ex-boyfriend, had constantly stalked the couple, had abused Stefania when they were dating, and was overall just a bad man. So this became this overall larger picture of domestic violence in New Mexico, and it's been a story that we've been telling. I've told repeatedly with most crime scenes that happen in this state, in that violent ex-boyfriends or husbands often can at times take that violence to the next step. And so you'll see some homicide scenes that we follow up where that stemmed. So I always take that knowledge from my first breaking scene and always look as to what the bigger picture is, how can I get better information, what avenues do I have, how much of the location that I'm covering do I know. And so yeah, that's kind of been it. And it all started at the Lobo, which has been kind of cool.
And this was day one.
This was day 3.
Day 3.
Yeah. And I got paid $5 for that story.
Henry, tell us a good story.
All right. So I moved to Santa Fe to work at the New Mexican in 2004. I'd just come from college. And I was pretty frustrated that first month because I had written several weather stories. Been assigned to do some kind of kids thing with Zobra. And basically my mind was numbing. Because I'm like, I'm getting the hell out of here as soon as I can. I'm assigned to cover the air show, because the air show hasn't been here for 5 years. Okay, so I go and meet people, write my little preview story, da-da-da-da. Saturday comes, I like airplanes, I'm going to go. But it's not news, it turns out, because nobody was there. And beautiful October, blue sky day, and these guys that we had met, they're flying, and it goes up like this, and he's got this stream of smoke, and he's going to pull it out at the beginning, at the end there, and he hits the ground. And there's a little mushroom cloud. And it's like time just slows down. And every moment starts ripping longer. Whoa. And I know there's no other reporters. Not from the Journal, not from us. I hear this little kid behind me, 3 years old probably. He just says, I don't understand. I've been looking for angles in this story to try and make it at least somewhat interesting to heal my numbing brain. I meant in the preparation for the air show. So I met I tried to do a safety angle, so I talked to the fire chief. I wanted to think of a logistical angle, so I talked to the airport manager. I met several of the pilots just because I wanted to, see if they'd let me sit in their planes. Only one did. So I start running. I start running over to the tower where the airport manager is, and I know him now. And I start getting over there, and I go, wait a second, I don't have anything. I run back to my car, and I open the doors, and I've got no pen, and I've got no paper. I have no notepad, okay? So tip 1, have a notepad in your car, right? But what I do have is my insurance, my proof of insurance. And there's a freaking Sharpie in there. So I've got my proof of insurance and a Sharpie, and I'm running. I'm running my little ass off, and I get over there, and I start jotting notes. Okay, I've been here for 2 weeks. All right, I better call in. So I call in, and I tell them what's going on. Only the managing editor is there. Well, this will be good for me. So I tell them what's going on. And I'm like, maybe we should get somebody else out here. No, who the hell these people are. So I just start recording. I get my stuff, I go back to the newsroom. I get there, I start typing away. This is 2004. We're not really in the mood for doing things like breaking news on the web. But we do. We send it out right away, we put it on the web, and people start hitting it. The managing editor is there. I sit down with him, and I said, what next? He says, you should call this guy's family. And I go, really? Somebody will recognize the Reservoir Dog reference here. Somebody throws a bucket of water at you, and all you goes, and then it hits you, right? So I call him up. And the first person who picks up is the man's daughter, and she's bawling. And I'm getting great advice from the managing editor, Rob Dean, before I call. He said, be respectful. Tell him what you want to do. Don't hide. We want to know who he was. He was your father, and he meant the world to you. Help us tell people why he meant the world to you. She talked to me for a minute. She couldn't talk anymore. She hands it off to mother, the wife, who talks to me for another minute, and she's sobbing. She hands off to a family friend who's there. They live in Colorado. This guy was a Navy flyer, fighter jets, all this. And the guy who I'm talking to is fighter jets and all this kind of thing. And the next day, in the newspaper, we had obituary, on the scene, photographs, graphics. And for me, I didn't have to do kid stories anymore. For me, there were two good things that came out of it. I gained a better understanding of the power of breaking news and doing things well, fast, and good. The second was, I actually started like to write obituaries. When I was writing, that was one of my favorite things to do based on this experience. So you never know what you're going to get out of a breaking story. And I think we got 3 pretty good ones right here.
So let's get a little more abstract here and talk about what sort of tools, physical and mental, besides notebooks, that you need to tackle these crazy random stories. We have an elephant, a shooting, and a plane crash. None of you woke up that morning thinking that was going to happen. But what skills that you had previously, or perhaps even learned on the spot right there, helped you do a good job with these stories? And Sean, let's start with you, because I don't want to hit Russell first every time. No, it's good stories, but we have time to think here.
Well, I mean, for the Hector Torres stuff, I was completely green, and I don't really know where that came from. I think about it and I can't explain it, but covering the Grego stuff, the big difference between that story and then the Torres story is that I didn't know anything about Hector Torres. I didn't know he was even involved until very late in the day. But with the Grego murders, we knew almost everything that had happened at 8:30 in the morning. Sheriff didn't release any information until 8:30, but we had already been taking in a number of tips, a number of calls from people and we knew people who knew this family directly who were telling us this happened, and these are the people involved. So then it became a matter of like, when are we going to release that information? And I guess that the tips and the tools I had to I guess mine through more information and to verify some of these tips were a list of sources, people in the community who I generally talk with, if not every day, but at least weekly. I meet in person too. I don't just talk to them over the phone, but we communicate by email a lot. People I can build a trust with. So when I am getting tips on a crazy story, I can sort of trust that where this information is coming from is reputable. So that's been really helpful.
Who are these people in the community?
Some are authority figures like elected officials, possibly police. Some are just neighbors, people who live, people who pay attention, people who find themselves as like the community source of general information. I mean, you have pockets in neighborhoods in this town where there's one person who knows everything that goes on in that neighborhood. Unfortunately, I know one of those people in that community, and so those types of people.
People were calling in tips, or
people were calling in tips, and so I would take some of those tips and go call my source and be like, "Hey, so I heard this, this, and this. What are you hearing?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's about what I heard too."
And this is a high-profile family.
This is a high-profile family.
So they're known.
They're very well known, and then the other thing too is that this Greg Grego, the father who was the victim, he sort of had two different personalities that we were hearing from. There was the one side that was he was a chaplain, reformed gang member, priest. Did a lot of work with inmates in the jail, and then we're hearing from a lot of other people who lived with him or who lived near him or who had known him when he was a gang member who said that attitude never changed. So then it's like, how are we going to report the story? How are we going to do what Henry did and just talk about, the loving side of one of the victims, or are we going to go on the other end too? So we eventually did. 2 days after the incident, we went into those angles of the personality of the Grego father, and that led to any of the issues in the household. But it took time. We knew that right as the scene happened. We knew this guy had a lot of issues, but we didn't report it until a couple days later.
So you had a good pre-existing network of people.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's the point I'm trying to make.
And you talk to these people. You sought them out at one point when you.
You start to identify certain people who know certain things, or you know.
And you just call them just to chat.
Just to chat, yeah. Most of the time, it's just to say hello. You know, you get to know about their lives, their families, and then eventually, information just comes to you. You have to pay attention when you're talking to them, because sometimes they'll just slide by. But that's always been my best way to find information.
It sounds like almost making friends in any social group.
Oh yeah, and that's difficult for me because I'm sort of socially awkward. So I have to force myself to go out and talk to people. I've never met them.
I saw information on that on Facebook. Do you ever use Facebook?
Yeah, in
as a
fact, I
source?
was the only person in the newsroom at the time. It was myself and a photographer. So my job is, I started as a web editor at KOP. And so my job is then to update our Twitter, our Facebook, our other social media outlets, and our website, which is the most important thing because that's where we make money, and updating that information as it went out. And yeah, we were the first to report it on Facebook, on our Twitter, and we had our website up as well. So,
Henry.
To that point, I think the breaking news tool to make sure you're really well conversant in today is Facebook secondarily, I'd say, and Twitter primarily. You can just get so much rich information and find people who would have never thought about contacting a news organization who witnessed things firsthand. Do folks here just nod your head yes or no? And I'm looking at all of you, so I better see some heads moving. Know the story of Really Virtual? Really Virtual? Thank you. Yes. Come on. Your head hasn't moved again. Thank you. Nor does yours, sir. Okay. Really Virtual. 2 years ago, I'm going to read you a couple of his tweets. You may figure this out before I give you the punchline. And if you do, please don't give it away because, I want to feel good about this. 2 years ago, it's about 1 a.m. Helicopter hovering above at 1 a.m. This is a rare event. Go away, helicopter, before I take out my giant fly swatter. Anyone figuring this out? Say yes or no with your head. Okay, good, sir. A huge window shaking bang here. I hope it's not the start of something nasty. The few people online at this time of night are saying one of the helicopters was not black. What is he tweeting about? Got any idea? Sir in the back, what's he tweeting about?
The assassination of Osama bin Laden.
If you didn't hear that, it's the assassination of Osama bin Laden. The guy had no idea. He's hearing the U.S. helicopters coming. He's hearing the flashbangs and everything going down. Now, most of the time, you're more likely to see people report that there are police cars and SWAT team and all this in my neighborhood rather than a world-shaking event. But making sure that you're using social media as part of the tools of which you report, here's the thing. Being a digital reporter means using digital sources as your sources for researching and keeping your finger on the pulse of things. Folks love to share what you know. Here's the thing. You make sure it's right. There's a lot of room for misinterpretation. That's your job. It's your job to find the information and make sure it's good and right.
So a good Rolodex, a good digital Rolodex with people you don't even necessarily know. Russell, anything to add to your toolbox?
Yeah, besides follow us on Twitter. These are our Twitter accounts. Please follow us, and we're breaking news in our own aspect. One of the things that person I use as a model is a guy by the name of Milton Valencia at the Boston Globe. And follow him if you can, Milton Valencia, at Milton Valencia. He is this amazing guy who is from an area of Massachusetts called Fall River, pretty rough city. He pronounced it Fall River. He's the first person at the Boston Globe, the first Hispanic hired at the Boston Globe who was born in Massachusetts. He started at his paper as a janitor, worked his way up, bugged the news editors at a newspaper in Central Mass to let me write cop stories. Worked his way up, and I saw how he worked his way up. This guy could really hustle. Now at the Boston Globe, a lot of the reporters there are from Harvard or from the Ivy Leagues. And so we had a problem breaking stories when there was a lot of violence in Boston. We would go to Dorchester, we go to Roxbury, and we couldn't get what actually happened. People weren't talking. There was a whole snitches get stitches movement where they didn't talk to cops. The cops couldn't break it. They didn't talk to reporters. But Milton got the story every time. And how he did it was he would go to Twitter. He would hear about a shooting, another gang violence shootings between rival gangs, and he would hashtag RIP. He would hashtag RIP. He would hashtag the street, and he would get the names every time. He would go look on the line, he would get the names, call them up, call the neighbors, show up, and he used his accent to say, I'm just the guy from Fall River. I heard that Tanika was shot. I'm just trying to get the story, And then they would say yes. And then he built this following. He had like 100 followers, and then he got like 5,000 like that, because he was the one guy that all these activists in these neighborhood folks trusted. And he was just using it through Twitter. Now, when he got Twitter, he had to check it out. He called his folks. He did everything he could to got that information to find out what happened. So with every story, he got the names. He got people talking about it. He would say that these are rival gangs out here, either from the Ivory Coast or from Cape Verdean gangs. People that the cops couldn't even get, he was getting. So he worked his way just through Twitter, is finding out how and what happened. And that's basically, he's using the new technology, but he's using old shoe leather reporting skills to find out, okay, here is a crime, this is what the police are telling me, how can I get in more information? And he taught me to do the same thing. When there was remember the big volcano eruption a couple years ago out in Europe? It was like the Iceland out there. So we had to come out, okay, well, what angles could we get in Boston? I was working at the Boston time. Well, I knew the marathon was coming up that week, so I just searched marathon, stranded, volcano, and I found this British guy who was all upset. He was sitting there in London airport, and he couldn't get out, and he'd been training for months for the Boston Marathon. So I direct messaged him. I said, "Can you call me?" We talked to each other on Skype, and it was great. I plugged in my recorder. I talked to him, and he's like, I'm absolutely gutted that I can't go. And it was great. I got that sound, sent it to AP. It was everywhere because now we had an angle in the United States about somebody who was affected by it. Not just an American tourist stranded, but somebody wanting to come to the United States and had been training for months, and he couldn't come. And we got our folks out. We got a freelance photographer out there, and it became this story about this poor British bloke who is just sitting there with his tennis shoes wrapped around his neck, depressed. I try to joke with him, why don't you go right around the airport, dog? He got real upset, But then, but it became this story. So, in using Twitter, not only if you have a story, you can look at hashtags just around your neighborhood. Some very, if it's a murder, you can do RIP, the name. There's different websites where you can actually search where the tweet's coming from, and then use that. Now, I wouldn't use that Twitter as the sole source for your story, because there's a lot of fake accounts. I mean, Manti Te'o's girlfriend has an account now on Twitter. My dog Tupac has an account. You can't trust those thoughts on. So you gotta. It's a element that you must check, but it is an important element that you can do to develop a story.
I want to hit one or two more points, and then we'll open the floor for questions here. But it strikes me that with any news story, you go into it thinking it's one thing, and then inevitably you discover it's something else. With breaking news, that process happens much, much faster. How do you, in your jobs, roll with those punches in a story that changes very dramatically, very quickly, while still keeping on top of being factual and ethical and making good decisions very quickly? So let's start with Henry first this time.
Breaking news today, tomorrow, and going forward is all about digital. Can anyone argue with me with that? I don't care how breaking the story seems to be, the next morning when it's in print, you can guarantee it was already out for 12 hours. So this is a digital question. Here are some things that I would like to impress upon you. You got a reporter in the field, you need somebody back at home base to help support that person. So if Sean's out there and he's getting details, he's feeding them back to me, I'm the one feeding the website. And what I don't want from Sean is, I don't want a bunch of quotes. because, one, they tend to be really stupid and poor reading. For instance, horrendous fire breaks out in downtown Albuquerque. This is one of the worst fires I've ever seen, said Chief John Smith. Who cares? Or Chief John Smith says something that you can almost guarantee he doesn't know enough about. Keep it tight in the beginning. Go with the things you absolutely freaking know. Not what you think, not what you're speculating, not what it seems to be. What you freaking know. Get that information out to people as soon as you can. Get it out in email to people. That's what the guy back at the office is doing. The guy or the gal, excuse me. Somebody needs to make a decision. Do we need to be live blogging this because this is something that's going to happen over several hours? Do I need to send out an email blast? Do I need to solicit stuff from people online? Stay accurate, stay tight. You have time to develop it. When you do an update, make sure it's actually an update. Nothing ticks me off worse than, news organizations that say, oh, the story updated, and what they actually found was, the name of a street. It's not an update. Make updates worthwhile. The only thing that bugs me more is when something that isn't breaking news is called breaking news. Okay, a crash on Coors is not necessarily breaking news. You can come up with the reasons why it might be, but make sure you know what those reasons are. But just everyday events that happen aren't breaking news just because it happened today.
Good examples. Watch once breaking news happens now. Like we can look at the Sandy Hook shooting last month as an example. Is when we're putting out news, all the news organizations will put out things, and we keep making mistakes. We'll keep saying that the mother was there at the school. Then we'll say, wait, the mother was at home. Or, wait, the mother was a teacher at the school. All these things were wrong. A few years ago, we didn't make those mistakes. Not because we weren't making mistakes, because we didn't publish them yet. Now we're publishing. We're tweeting them out. We're putting them on the websites. So you see our process more. It's more transparent. Where maybe 20 years ago, we were making all those mistakes, but we corrected them by the time we went to, say, to print for a newspaper. So when you got the paper in the morning, we had confirmed everything we needed to so that you get a story. It doesn't work like that because you guys, the consumers, want news now. So we keep putting out information, and we're going to make mistakes. But the good organizations, the good news organizations, will correct them right away and say, correction on the tweet, mother was not at school, mother was at home. Correction on the tweet, a machine gun wasn't used, it was an RA-15 or a handgun, whatever the case is. So that the people who are following the story see it unfold. And that's not unusual and that's not wrong. That's just the world we live in. The good news organizations will confirm everything. Now the AP and KOB have really strict standards on what we can put out. We can't put out speculation. Right? A lot of times we're not putting out the first quotes. We get witness accounts, but those witness accounts, we vet them almost on the spot. You can tell right away if they're BSing us or if they saw something. Even if they hear something, that might be useful. And you'll talk to your news director, your editor, should we use this? You stay away from quotes that say it looked like a war zone. That's my worst one. I mean, how do you know? Have you been to war? And I ask, well, no, right? And if it's like a Vietnam vet, look, yes, actually, it was in Saigon when it fell. Oh, okay. Right? The other one is like, a tornado. Every time this, I hate this one. It sounded like a freight train. I did a search on AP Wire once to say how many times it sounded like a freight train came out, and it came out like 200 times in Oklahoma. And then what was funny is that when a freight train wreck happened, someone said it sounded like a tornado. It was so those are cliches you want to avoid. Now they're very easy, and a lot of times it's lazy of us to do something. We want something fast. It sounds like a freight train. Rather than someone said, this reminded me of the time I was in that refugee camp in Congo and I saw too many people die. The blood was everywhere. The blood here is bringing back those memories. Boom, you got something possible, right? That this person is bringing back some sort of memory. And you could develop that later on. But be very conscious who you're talking to. Sometimes you'll get, someone will see a newscast or a tweet and show up to the scene, and that person will just repeat what you've been saying. I've seen this happen too, where someone was following, I'll get them and say, yeah, I came out here. And then a reporter goes, what did you see? And they repeat exactly what had been tweeted. Then they run and that guy's exploded. I mean, that guy had no business quoting. So just be on the lookout, because folks are always trying to get the news. And you're asking, you're not there to make anyone famous. You're there to find out what happened and tell a good story.
John, anything to add there?
I guess. Well, okay. What KOB does, we have text alert systems, so we do every day. We judge a news story that's come in and ask ourselves, is this worthy to send out a text alert? We often do anytime there's a major traffic accident. Sometimes the Coors accident off Paseo affects thousands of commuters every day, so we will put that on a text alert.
But he knows why that's news.
Yeah.
He knows why that's news.
Yeah, so we will do that. We had a practice that we've just changed into where we have to update our website before we put out any text alert or tweet or any real information out in social media on the internet, and have a link to our website in almost every update we post on either Facebook or Twitter. And that's all been done to monetize the news that we're putting out there, because that's the one thing that we haven't discussed, is that we're not making any money putting out information on Twitter. And oftentimes other reporters are looking at the information you're putting out there and then just, as Russell said, taking that and going and getting that quote and then verifying it as their own, even though it was you doing the reporting. So we've been really cautious in how we release information and details when it comes to breaking news on social media. We always now, like I said, always make sure we have something on our website, even if it's just a sentence, even if it's a sentence saying 5 people killed in the South Valley, check back KOB.com for updates later in the day. You always want to have that as well. When you're breaking a news story on your website, you always need to leave a tag for more. You always need to have people coming back for more. And you always need to make it clear at the very end of your story. Now your news organizations are going to have different formats in how you update a story. I know the Journal will sometimes, or Journal often does the breaking news story and then adds timestamps and new information on top of that story. So it's like this continuous thread of breaking information. Some organizations do the live blog. We often just, we'll often update the story in one complete text. That's our practice for right now. But yeah, for us it's always big to drive traffic back to our website. And that Griego homicide traffic, the traffic we got on that day in 4 hours nearly doubled what we get in a week. So it was smart for us to do that. Otherwise we would have missed out on all.
It was a weekend too, right?
And it was a Sunday, yeah. And in 1 hour we had more traffic on that story than we do for a weekend, for our weekends combined in a month, if that makes any sense.
Quickly here, because I want to get to audience questions. But the three of you would be very comfortable sitting in the office at 9, having coffee, and by 10, on a crime scene, up at some public official's face, talking to a victim's family member, something like that. Now this didn't come naturally, I think, to many people. Somehow, the three of you got from being a relatively timid, polite person to the kind of person who could be really out there. How did you, especially for the benefit of everyone here who's getting into this business, how do you develop that personality where you can do stuff like that and not have a nervous breakdown?
Well, I'll start with I started off really rambunctious and problem child, and that personality got me in a lot of trouble growing up. So then I tapered that down in my teenage years, and then I figured out that I can do a job where I can express that, and I can be that outward individual and, cause trouble and get paid to do it, and curse and, at work, and dress like this all the time too. So yeah, I honestly feel like it just sort of came naturally. The news was an outlet for me to be able to do that and not get arrested.
The other two on this panel, did you have to train yourself to do that, or were you equally rambunctious?
Well, I actually consider myself a fairly shy person, and journalism actually helps me get out of that. But a few years ago, I had to take a corporate personality test, and it confirmed something that I knew all along. I have a problem with authority. And all my favorite journalists do. And and then there's the other half, there's the excitement of it. Anybody, what's your favorite newspaper-related movie? Just say it. Somebody yell!
All the President's Men.
No, you're wrong, sir. Your favorite movie is actually The Paper. Okay? So thank you, John. I'm sorry you have that wrong. But it's The Paper. Who has seen The Paper? Who has seen The Paper? You're all watching it tonight. Okay? But But there's this great scene. Michael Keaton is trying to get the story and is at dinner with his wife and his in-laws. And somebody calls him. He's going to get the quote. He's going to get the quote. I got to get the quote, honey. You know what this is like, honey. I got to get the quote. And all of a sudden you see his face is sweating and his hands are shaking. And his buddy, what she doesn't know is that he already called his buddy 10 minutes ago to pick him up and take him to the PlayStation. And you start feeling your heart, and it's going like this, and you've got a great story on deadline. And every time the seconds tick on the clock, it sounds like boom! And you just go, screw this. 11:30? What? 11:35 deadline? Screw that! Give me copy! Damn the torpedoes and go! And when you have those experiences, you'll love it. Especially the next day when the story is perfect. And you didn't make any errors. You answer tomorrow's question and your editor looks at you and goes, I don't know what you're going to do with this next. Because you've got it dead solid perfect. That gets it to you.
The changing my personalities, like since I grew up in Texas, in Houston, was very formal, so I was taught that when you call somebody, you say, hey, how you doing? That works unless you're calling somebody who just lost a family member and giving an obit. So again, that first news job I had, that when you get assigned obits, it's someone just desperately needs something from the family. I would call and say, very cheery, say, hi, this is Russell McCurry, how you doing? And of course the one was like, I'm pretty effing upset, I just lost my mother. And of course the interview would go downhill from there. So an editor taught me something that I still use today, is think about it. He heard me on the phone and he called me in his office and said, think about you just upset your girlfriend and you need to convince her to change her mind about something. That's what you should do when you talk to folks who just lost somebody. So it changed my mind, it changed that personality where I would go in and the tactic I would use is I would lower my voice and talk slow and say, hi, this is Russell from the Boston Globe. First of all, I just want to apologize. I know you lost a family member. We offer condolences and our thoughts and prayers with your family. Every time, with the exception of maybe once or twice, they say thank you. We really appreciate it. Then I say, I hate to do this to you, but we're writing a story about your aunt, your mother. We'll make sure we get it right. And just, I know you're busy and you've got some time, you've got arrangements. I just need a few minutes of your time to talk about her life. That always wakes up. And you talk slowly, you lower the voice, you show empathy. You're very sympathetic. People open up that way. And of course people want to talk. They're right now, they're all up inside and they want to share stories. A lot of times you can get them laughing. And they will remember that you actually got me laughing the first time my mother died, right? Because they start remembering things. Like, she was a great woman, blah, blah. She had tons of hats in the closet. In fact, I just found out she bought one. She just bought another hat. Yes, it's in the car. I was like, in this freezing weather? And then they start laughing, yes. And then, of course, that's a detail in your story. You develop that. When you go to the scene, you do the exact same thing. Don't arrive with your notepad up there and get in their face. Put it in your pocket. Look around and say, what's going on here? And then when you start asking questions, make it very clear you're a reporter. So you can get access, dress the part. I cannot tell that, just stress that point. I've gone to funerals. A lot of times I'm the only reporter that gets in because I dress the part. I dress up in a suit and tie, I wear black, I wear sunglasses. This happened at a time when I went to a funeral in Boston where a brother killed all his sisters, 2 or 3 of his sisters. A cop came in right at the time this murder was happening when he was decapitating one of the sisters' head, and the cop shot him. The family decided to bury them all together, have a funeral. So at the place there were 3 or 4 coffins. I was the only one to get them in the scene because I had dressed the part. They said no media. I walked in. They actually recognized me. They gave me a pound and said, come on in. They brought me to my seat. While the other reporters, the Boston Globe guy, was dressed like a complete dork. He had on khakis and a shirt, and he had his little pad. He was obviously a reporter. They didn't want that in there because they knew that he wasn't going to be respectful. I sat down, took notes in my head, got the scene, was able to get that story because I dressed the part. Do that when you arrive at a scene too as well. Whether you're covering a rodeo or whether you're covering a funeral, what you want is access. If anybody asks, you are a reporter, don't lie. That's the one thing that you cannot, unless you're doing some sort of investigative stuff, that you cannot lie. And when you get there, you'll get access and you'll get the story you need. And if you don't, if you get roadblocks, you can find a way around it. There's always a way.
Questions from y'all?
So when the Griego murder, when Eric Griego, former senator, went before the national news, how did you all cover it after? that a surprise to you?
We knew he was going to be on headline news. We didn't know he was going to blame the 12-year-old girlfriend. So that was a little. He did have some inflammatory remarks, and that's how we covered it. We got the clip from headline news, which is an effort in itself because they're a different network than us. So we have to figure out broadcasting rights and how we can release it and everything. So his remarks were we knew he was going to be on it, but what he said was a surprise to us. And I guess not only were we shocked, but general public was shocked by it. And so that's how we covered that story.
Some of your journalism seems to be based a little bit more on bad news rather than good news. And just because it's a breaking news story or something like that, it's going to give you a lot of credit for it. Do you feel like it's your part to really cover these stories, or do you want to just escape from it all and kind of cover your own story with your story? It's like a good story. Big person.
I think every news market is a reflection of its community. One of the things I hear a lot is that TV, radio, television here covers a lot of murders, crime. Well, we have a lot of murders and crime, and we can't ignore them. We have a lot of accidents. If you look at just the statistics in terms of census, we deal with a lot of poverty. We're dealing with a lot of poverty. We're dealing with a lot of lower education expectations and so forth. And that is reflective of all these things you see. So it's very difficult. I hear a lot of folks saying, well, I see TV covering a lot of murder, that it's like cops and shops. Well, yeah, when 5 people get killed, you cannot ignore that. And you can't turn around and say, well, you know what, we have this United Way special about them really helping out this cancer treatment, they raise a lot of funds. You can still cover that, but that's going to have to wait till there's space. And there'll be moments for that time to cover those type of stories. And there are some stories out there, but it's time and place, because it would be unethical for us to put that aside and say, let's cover that story right now about the Las Cruces principal who wanted to raise money for cancer awareness, and in return we'll get into the ring with a world championship boxer. I mean, that's an interesting story, but there's time and place. And and I hear a lot, folks, especially critics, will say, I hate hearing the news because it's all bad news, it's all bad news, it's all bad news. Well, not necessarily. There are times where there is the story about a vet coming back who had lost his legs and is getting some treatment because they did a story about he was having problems with the veteran administration or something. And then people came together and donated money and bought him prosthetic legs or something. Those stories will get on there. Those aren't ignored. I think a lot of times people tend to criticize because we'll put those stories out and then we look at the traffic. A lot of times they're not getting hits. People aren't clicking them. They're clicking the murderous ones. And it's reflective of what the consumer is. So we have to balance. Do we give the people what they want, right, other than what we feel is objective? Because if we gave the people what we want, we'd be giving you all drugs and weed. If we give the people what we want, we look at what was just popular, nothing but porn would be popular. So that's not what we're about. So we have to have a balance, and we want to give stuff that's going to be people are going to read or that are interested in. But we also want to make sure that we give something that is newsworthy.
I have a good example of that. 2 weeks ago, there was a YAFL president, which is the Young American Football League. A president and his wife had been arrested on child pornography charges. And that was our big story for the weekend. But that same weekend, we covered the Albuquerque Comic Con convention, which was donating a large amount of their proceeds to a young 4-year-old girl who had leukemia. We covered that on Sunday and Saturday. My cousin that day, at the end of Sunday, my cousin was like, you guys basically gave your same criticism. That you guys covered a lot of nasty news, yada, yada, yada. Did you ever do anything positive? And I'm like, yeah, we did the story on the Comic-Con. They gave a bunch of money to a little girl with leukemia. Did you see it? He's like, nah, I tuned out. So I don't think a lot of people are really paying attention to the good news stories. It's really easy to focus on the negative that we put out there. I mean, honestly, it's always the top story usually, and the positive stuff comes later. You just have to stay tuned in.
So then,
We do cover a lot of good stories.
the only thing I would add to that is, first of all, I think it's wonderful to be optimistic. I think in such a cynical world, it is a very great thing to do. Here's one of the nice things that I like about digital news and the internet, is that there is a place for every niche. You can find, you can develop, you can publish the news site that is about optimistic, good news, and you will find a niche. Don't believe me? I'll tell you this. I think in general that food sections of newspapers and television news suck. And I would go to Epicurious. I am not a raving fan of sports coverage in those same mediums. I would go to ESPN.com. There is a place for every interest, and there is a place for 17th century poetry and design using cascading style sheets, using one template that all you can do is change the file on. You all know that there's a niche, and good news, not told in the cliche, patronizing way that so often it is. Who reads Good magazine? Anyone read Good?
Yeah.
Read Good? And how do you feel about it?
Good.
Would you mind, really quick, just sharing what Good magazine is?
You know, it's just, it seems like whenever I picked it up, it's a lot of like good news. It's whatever you won't see on the TV because you're tuned out.
Right.
It's going to be in that magazine, and it's described in a way that makes you feel nice. You
And
know?
never, it's not patronizing.
No,
No,
never.
it's really
Yeah.
hard hitting.
Yeah.
So often a good story has to be, talk to little Jimmy who's 3 and you gotta feed him the wine, that's my
Yeah.
favorite. Good Lord. I don't want to see good news if it's gonna be like that. For crying out loud, I'd rather have a deer and tend to my garden. But I love that.
Let's take one more question. Yes.
Okay. So when I hear of breaking news, I usually think of speed. So you have to put it out as quickly as you can. But also if you're talking about news, it has to always be accurate, right? So I just have that feeling that if you put it out as quickly as you can, it's not going to be as accurate as you research more on it. So how do you find that balance to keep those accuracy and speed in breaking news?
Well, AP, we have some very strict standards. You have to confirm it. It has to be sure. If something that's really big, September 11th, and it goes right there. We put it out in the wire. We'll do a flash. Now we have we put alerts. If you have our app on your iPhone or your Android, it goes directly there. That has been confirmed, especially when we were covering the Penn State stuff. Our reporters out there were amazing. They were breaking it on hand right there. It all has to be confirmed. A lot of times when it's a big story like that, there's a chain of editors that is in place that confirm this is what I have. Are you sure? That goes up there and like, do we have this? Do we have that? And it goes there. If we try, if we get beat, so well. So what? It happens. But we try to get it first. A lot of times we're able to do it because we have this structure in place, so we can go out there and write it real quick. And since a lot of media outlets pay us for that, all right, they expect a certain ethics in producing that. That's why they pay us. So you'll have bloggers that blog something in other outlets, and you'll see the mistakes they make. Now, we make mistakes too, because we'll put out something like Sandy Hook thing, and there was a lot of times there was conflicting information coming from the investigators themselves or witnesses themselves. So that's not uncommon, like I said earlier. You're going to see it's going to be more transparent. But that is always going to be the challenge in this meeting because everybody is demanding. There's a constant fist on the desk of what is happening, what is happening, what is happening. You see this a lot in Washington. And the story will change. Sometimes you are dead accurate. And then your source will change his or her mind and say, we're not going to go with this proposal. And you have to be on guard of that. And so that's not unusual. What is unusual, I think, is when you tweet out something and the story changes and say the tweet is wrong. What I think a lot of media outlets are saying is not to delete the tweet, but to retweet with the correction and tell us what the correction is. So that they see you are not trying to hide anything and you're not trying to be deceptive. You are being very transparent. This is what I found. It is wrong. We are correcting it. This is what we have now.
My biggest mistake I think it comes to practice a lot of times. It's fast and accurate. But I remember at first, for me, the mistakes I would generally make were spelling errors or grammatical errors, and I took those as like, all right, that's not the worst thing in the world because I didn't get a piece of information wrong. It doesn't look good, obviously, but when I first started off, that's what I would aim for. I would aim for at least just a grammatical error. And then back to the Griego stuff, I was working the day that the Sandy Hook shootings came down, and I remember monitoring media and seeing a lot of different mistakes that were coming out and looking at all the different criticisms after the fact. And I gotta say, like, I don't think the Albuquerque media made any major errors or had to do any major clarifications or corrections on the grade or shootings. I think for the most part, everybody was pretty sound with what they reported, even as it was coming in, sort of fast for some people. But at least for that, I mean, I'm sort of proud that we didn't, nationally, internationally, people were looking at us and we didn't mess up. Yeah, if they at all.
Any final thoughts?
When you have it, publish it. Be bold and fast and quick and accurate. Be ethical. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Practice. Know your craft. When people give you information, Russell said the magic words, I don't care if you're talking to a cop. You ask them, how do you know? How do you know? And if it doesn't smell right, doesn't feel right, you don't go with it. You go with what you know. You can build on it. You can build on it. You can build on it. And it's okay. We don't give up accuracy. We don't give up precision. We don't get sloppy. We just go with what we know. And we're transparent. Now that you're getting older, you realize that your parents didn't have all the answers. Guess who also doesn't? The news media. We don't. My gosh, sometimes I'm in a newsroom, I look around and I said, these are the people who produced all this? Unbelievable. I wouldn't trust this guy with a potato gun. So if you need to say, I don't know, in a breaking situation, feel free to add. Here are questions we're working on that we don't know, that we've not confirmed. It's okay. Be transparent. Let people know what you do and do not know, and don't deceive. Don't lie.
Coming up in 10 minutes, we have a panel titled Everything Else You Need to Know to Get a Job These Days, but that's all the time we have for this one. Please give our panel a hand as they recognize.